Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Acting Sub-Lieutenant Fionn Wilkinson. We warmly welcome the visiting group from Lockheed Martin. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is not by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Please sit if you can do so. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Sergeant Richard John Swan. Richard Swan was born in 1892 in Stratford, in East Gippsland region of Victoria. Affectionately known as Dick, he was the second eldest of 5 children, born to saddler Edward Swan and his wife Jane. Dick was educated locally and was an active member of his community. He was a member of the local church choir and one of Stratford's leading athletes, playing cricket, football, and tennis. At the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, he was working as a grocer and was engaged to a local woman named Bernice Keane. Dick Swan enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 29th of January 1916. He was assigned to a company of the 37th Battalion and began a short period of training in Australia. He embarked for active service from Melbourne on the 3rd of June, sailing on board troopship Persic. Private Swan arrived in Plymouth, England at the end of July in 1916. He continued training alongside other new recruits before traveling to the Western Front in November. He joined his unit later that month, just in time to spend a bitterly cold winter in the trenches. In February of the following year, Swan was promoted to corporal while his unit continued serving on the front lines. Like many who succumbed to the difficult conditions of the trenches, Swan contracted influenza and spent a week in hospital at the end of March of 1917. Following his return to duty, his unit took part in the advance that followed the Germans' strategic retreat to the Hindenburg Line. Over the months that followed, his unit was involved in a series of raids on enemy lines, during which time Swan was again promoted, this time to sergeant. In June, his unit traveled to Belgium and took up positions along the Ypres salient. There, Swan took part in his first major battle of the war as the Allies attempted to capture the strategic Mizzen-Wachant Ridge. The battle began in the early hours of the morning of the 7th of June 1917, when 19 mines laid beneath German lines were detonated. The explosion destroyed the enemy's front line, creating hundreds of massive craters and allowing the Allies to advance on their objectives. Despite the overall success of the operation, it was consolidated that over 7 days which followed, Allied units suffered nearly 25,000 casualties. Of these, nearly 7,000 were Australian. Among them was Sergeant Dick Swan, who was killed by machine gun fire on the second day of the attack. Lieutenant Fraser of the 10th Machine Gun Company wrote to Swan's father and described the attack. "I am an officer of the 10th Machine Gun Company, and I was ordered to support the 37th Battalion during the attack, during which I met your son. Up to that time, I never knew him, but his gallant behavior during a very short period that I did know him has made such an impression on me that I shall always regard him as one of the bravest and best men I've ever met. I was with the 37th when we received orders to move forward to take up the position on the second objective, which is about 1,000 yards and strongly held by enemy with machine guns. We pushed forward, but had only proceeded a few yards when Germans opened mercilessly fire upon us, and only a few were spared to reach our objectives. Among that few was Sergeant Swan. By this time, I had lost all my men, killed or wounded, and I was endeavoring to manage the machine gun myself when Sergeant Swan came to my aid, and from that time onward until he was killed, we fought side by side. I still remember his brave manner and cheerful smile when he came to my aid. Shortly after taking up our new position, your son was killed. He was shot through the head and passed away without saying a word. My admiration for Sergeant Swan has forced me to write to you to let you know that he was a noble soldier and how fearless he proved himself to be under the most trying of circumstances. Sergeant Swan was later remembered by his fiancée Bernice in a notice posted to the Age newspaper. How I longed and waited for those happier days to be, and in the midst of my greatest joy, my love was taken from me. Oh, for the touch of a vanished hand and the sound of his voice still in my head. Swan's final resting place was lost during subsequent fighting in the region. Today, he is commemorated in the Meangate Memorial in Ypres, among more than 50,000 others who have no known grave. Dixon was 24 years old. His name is listed in the Roll of Honour on my right amongst 62,000 Australians who have died while serving in the First World War. A photograph of his name listed in the Meangate Memorial is displayed here today for the pool reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Sergeant Richard Swan, who gave his life for us, for our freedom, and for our hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many man lying out there at Pozieres or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support. during the memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.